The gate of silent ascent was not a structure carved by men, but a celestial scar ripped into the fabric of the mortal realm. Shingai, an Asian young man, a young Asian man with a lean, athletic build. Medium length, dark black hair tied back, blue sapphire eyes, full black clothes and the armor of transcendent sorrow, defiant aura. It stood between two impossibly high, polished mountains of jade, forming an archway that opened into an endless, churning void. Within that void, nebulas of divine energy spiraled and crashed, hinting at the true power of the celestial court beyond. Shingai approached, his steps measured and silent across the final stretch of gray, volcanic dust. The air here was thin, crackling with raw, undiluted heavenly ki that would have crushed any lesser cultivator into dust. But Shingai, enveloped in the armor of transcendent sorrow, was immune to both the pressure and the cold. He was an anomaly. Waiting at the base of the gate was a single, disciplined formation of guards, clad in the polished obsidian armor of the Jade Serpent Guard. They did not move, their weapons remaining sheathed, displaying an unnerving confidence that suggested their role was merely ceremonial. Standing before them was the man who commanded them all, Marshal Yin. Marshal Yin was an imposing figure, not physically massive, but radiating an authority so absolute it seemed to warp the very light around him. His robes were midnight blue, adorned with silver embroidery that depicted the constellations, and his face was a mask of cold, intellectual calm. He carried no obvious weapon, the power of his spiritual cultivation alone being considered the most dangerous asset of the celestial court. As Shingai stopped 50 paces away, Marshal Yin lifted a single, gloved hand in a gesture of truce, not surrender. "The wandering god arrives," Marshal Yin stated, his voice ringing with the clarity of a newly struck bronze bell. "A century of chaos ends tonight." Shingai remained silent. The heart shield of desolate truth kept his face vacant, making it impossible for Yin to read his emotions or intentions. "I confess, your transformation is formidable," Yin continued, a faint tone of academic interest entering his voice. "The armor of transcendent sorrow is a masterpiece of spiritual defense. You are an absolute wall, Shingai. You could walk through the armies of the celestial court without pausing. But victory is not always about destruction." Shingai finally spoke, the sound gravelly from disuse. "The path ends here." "No," Marshal Yin corrected him gently. "The prophecy ends here." The prophecy was never about vengeance, but about preventing it. Yin took one step forward. The Jade Serpent Guard did not twitch. "You chose solitude over destruction. I respect that choice. However, the existence of a being with infinite defensive power and unknown purpose is an existential threat to the ordered cosmos. Therefore, the court, having foreseen this exact outcome, prepared the ultimate countermeasure, the final order, a deep, resonant hum began to emanate from Marshal Yin's person, growing rapidly in intensity until the very ground began to tremble. The surrounding Jade Serpent Guards, without any visible signal, began to simultaneously activate complex, intricate spiritual seals carved into their armor. These seals glowed with a pure, unbearable white light, their collective power flowing immediately and seamlessly into Marshal Yin. The Marshal was acting as a perfect conduit, channeling the spiritual energy of hundreds of elite cultivators into a single, terrifying art. "Your defense is based on the integration of power, the sorrow of the river, the permanence of the mountain, and the cold fury of your ancestor. Our solution is not to destroy that power, but to simply remove the vessel. We call it the heavenly seal of nullification." As he spoke, the white light coalescing around him began to change color, deepening into an unnatural, absolute blackness. This blackness did not consume light. It was an absence of spiritual ki, an anti-power designed to suppress all cultivation. Marshal Yin raised both hands above his head, the terrifying black energy swirling between his palms, forming a perfect miniature vortex. The air pressure dropped so violently that the Jade Mountain seemed to groan under the sudden weightlessness. "The goal, Shingai, is not your death," Yan explained, his eyes fixed on the vortex. "It is the temporary nullification of your Dansyan. We will suppress your spiritual core, lock away the sorrow, and allow you to pass into the celestial court. There, can be monitored and contained. This was the true trap. Complete isolation and eternal imprisonment within the celestial boundary. Shingai understood the cunning of the strategy. His defense was perfect, but it relied on the constant operation of his Danzion. If the Danzion was nullified, even for a moment, the heart shield and the sorrow armor would flicker, leaving him exposed. Shingai finally lifted the Star Eater blade, the heavy obsidian humming faintly in the suppressing pressure. He still wouldn't speak, but the gesture was clear. He would not surrender or be contained. Ah! Marshal Yin shook his head sadly, a gesture of intellectual regret. A pity. Then we proceed to the inevitable. He thrust the swirling black vortex forward, not as a projectile, but as a wave of absolute spiritual suppression. The heavenly seal of nullification traveled outward, instantly silencing the heavenly key in its path, creating a rapidly expanding sphere of spiritual vacuum. As the seal approached, Shingai's armor of transcendent sorrow flared, a silver-white light pushing back against the blackness. The resulting collision was silent, a battle of pure spiritual concepts, absolute defense versus absolute nullification. The black key began to seep into the silver light, not burning or destroying it, but quietly turning the spiritual energy inert. Shingai felt a chilling, deep numbness spread from his skin inward, racing toward his Danzion. This was the first time since his transformation that his defenses had been fundamentally challenged. The heart shield began to vibrate violently, desperately trying to metabolize the nullifying energy, but there was nothing to metabolize, only an absence. The psychic weight of the sorrow, the grief of the river of silent tears began to surge, momentarily overloading the shield. The sensation was paralyzing. The spiritual core was being muffled, suffocated, its power temporarily locked away. Shingai, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, was forced to act on instinct rather than cold calculation. He had always chosen to absorb power. Now, he had to expel it to force the seal back. The prophecy foresaw this moment, the moment the wandering god would be forced to reveal the true power of his transformation. Not just the defense, but the terrifying offensive potential of the accumulated sorrow. With a guttural sound that tore through his armored throat, Shingai drove the Star Eater blade into the ground beneath his feet. He released a devastating amount of pure channeled energy into the earth, but not outward toward Marshal Yin. Instead, he channeled it upward, through his own body, turning his entire being into a spiritual lightning rod. This was the god-shattering counterstrike, the technique designed to shatter the very foundations of the world. But Shingai did not aim it at Yin. He aimed it at the gate. A blinding pillar of yin. Blackhand silver energy erupted from his position, tearing into the chaotic celestial energy of the gate of silent ascent. The gate roared in protest, the massive columns of jade mountains visibly shaking as the force attempted to destabilize the celestial boundary. The attack was a desperate, calculated move, force Marshal Yin to divert the heavenly seal from Shingai to protect the gate itself. Marshal Yin's eyes widened, betraying a flicker of alarm for the first time. The stability of the gate was paramount. Marshal instantly split his concentration, diverting 3/4 of the heavenly seal's power to stabilize the celestial vortex. The black nullifying energy crashed into the gate's shimmering surface, absorbing the massive power of the god-shattering counterstrike and protecting the boundary. The distraction worked. The pressure on Shingai's Danzion immediately subsided, allowing the armor of transcendent sorrow to reassert its absolute defense. The Star Reader blade screamed as Shingai pulled it free, obsidian glowing with residual terrifying power. He had bought himself mere moments, but he had revealed his weakness, the Danzion's vulnerability, and his strength, the god-shattering counterstrike. Marshal Yin stabilized the gate, his expression now one of intense cold focus. Clever Shingai, you threaten the cosmos to save yourself, but you cannot maintain an offensive of that magnitude indefinitely. I can maintain the seal. The Marshal began to reform the heavenly seal of nullification, this time doubling the input from the Jade Serpent guards. The air became even heavier, the silence more profound, the tension a physical, crushing weight. Shingai knew his next move had to be definitive. He could not afford another defensive stand. He saw the shadow. Walker's Alpha and Gamma, the advanced team he had defeated earlier, materialized far off on the mountaintops, watching. They were merely spectators now, ready to move in only after the marshal completed his work. The fate of the realm came down to this final, desperate duel of power and will. Xingai took a deep breath, the spiritual core stabilized by the armor of transcendent sorrow. He focused on the single truth of the wandering god. The end is not victory, but the completion of the path. Marshal Yin raised the fully charged heavenly seal of nullification, now radiating with enough absolute suppression to crush a minor mountain range. He launched the seal again, a black tide of spiritual vacuum surging toward Xingai, intending to completely envelop and lock away his power. Xingai moved, not to block, but to attack. He ran forward, using the celestial gale step to pierce the edges of the seal's suppressing field. He aimed the starter blade, now glowing with a terrible dark light, directly at Marshal Yin's heart. The clash would not be a mere impact. It would be the collision of two absolute forces. Ultimate defense meeting ultimate authority. The Shadow Walkers watched from afar, knowing that the battle would decide the future of the entire Jade dynasty. The climax of the prophecy, the final duel that would prevent the ancestral vow's fulfillment, was upon them. The God-shattering counterstrike had been the warning. Star Eater strike would be the truth. Marshal Yin stood his ground, letting the black wave of nullification advance. Confident that Xingai's movement would be slowed just enough for the seal to consume him mid-strike. Xingai vanished entirely into the black void of the seal's field. The Star Eater blade, the vessel of 1,000 years of sorrow, met the cold, unyielding authority of Marshal Yin. The impact was still silent and absolute. The heavenly seal of nullification enveloped Xingai. And then an impossibility. A single thin crack appeared in the seal. The crack expanded, and a concentrated beam of dark silver light erupted, striking Marshal Yin square in the chest. The marshal was thrown backward, skidding dozens of meters across the ground. He was unscathed, but deeply shocked. Xingai emerged from the dissolving black field, breathing heavily, the Star Eater raised. He had used the blade's ultimate sharpness to pierce the seal's defense. They stood separated by 20 paces, both having revealed their supreme power, both now at full capacity. Marshal Yin smiled, a slow, cold twist of the lips. So the wandering god can bleed. The fight begins. Xingai prepared his next strike. Knowing the time for defense was over, and the time for overwhelming force had arrived, the ultimate duel for the fate of the Celestial Court and the fulfillment of the tragic prophecy has begun. Will Xingai's sorrowful blade pierce Marshal Yin's authority? Or will the heavenly seal finally lock away the wandering god? Comment your predictions. Like this video script, share it with fellow fans, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for Part 7.